Listeners and subscribers, hope all is well. Today we're going to be getting into some content that you're probably going to have to take with a grain of salt depending on what worldview you carry. Now, if you are one of my subscribers, you probably already familiar with some terms, Q-Anon, deep state, and we're going to be throwing those around. We're also going to be getting into power grabs and coup d'etats and a couple of different schools of thought. We're going to just go ahead and dive right into it. So really quickly, QAnon is either an individual, a group of individuals, or AI, depending on what you believe. And it is used to educate people on just what is going on. And it's very cryptic. I will have to say, a lot of the information is very cryptic. But what is happening is what is essentially being touted is that things as we know it are going to change, right? The people that people like myself and others make videos about and try to warn about are all about to be locked up. They're about to be dealt with. But before that can happen, we need martial law where executive orders have to be instituted. And that's going to be where all these sickos, the pedophiles, the George Soroses and Henry Kissingers are going to be locked up and things are going to be taken care of. But first we need martial law. Now, believe it or not, that is what some people, even in the alternate narrative community, believe, the truther community, whatever you want to call it. So I'm very suspicious about the narrative that's being sold from the QAnon angle that martial law has to happen and all the context that comes along with that in order for the big baddies to be locked up. I'm a little suspicious and skeptical when it comes to that, at least, especially since it's being painted as this conservative right-wing conspiracy theory.
They wore shirts and signs emblazoned with only the letter Q. Their numbers seem to be growing, and they were spotted last night at President Trump's Florida rally. They are a new fringe conspiracy theory group called Q-Anon.
And these guys who are regularly gun-wielding individuals who might have otherwise fought against a totalitarian measure like a martial law military lockdown police state scenario are now complicit with it. They're complying, and I think that's dangerous. We see that the system has been adapting itself to the individuals. As I said, there's people who are waking up, and I think the system knows that people aren't going to buy into what they're being sold as readily anymore. They'll question it, so they have to put a lot of red herrings out there. There's other things that people won't have difficulty questioning. Some of the shootings, some of the bigger things in scope, like the national emergency declarations and the missile launches and stuff. It makes it sometimes it's a little bit more difficult for them to tie those into nefarious underpinnings. But some of the other stuff is pretty much in your face, and I think when we're starting to go mainstream with this information, or the mainstream media is starting to breach into these realms, I think once we start to hear a mantra from the media that they're trying to brainwash you, they're trying to tell you something, they're trying to get you to believe in something, because something is just around the corner. And that's kind of where I stand on that. I find it hard to imagine that any type of police state military lockdown scenario is going to be beneficial for people like us. Then they're completely separately, you have people who believe currently that a coup d'etat is happening, this power grab where things like the Stormy Daniels case and the Mueller probe and all this legal action against Trump with Russia collusion has been attempts to get Trump out of power, and it to be done in a way where Pence gets out of power as well, so that eventually the next running up in line in presidency, of the succession of presidency, would be the Speaker of the House, and that this has all been planned strategically to get Nancy Pelosi into office as president, so that the deep state can take over. And I mean, I know I'm throwing a lot at you here, and again, if you've been following my channel, you know that this isn't far out of line with what is going on in alternate narrative circles, because what has happened is people don't believe what goes on in the government or the puppet show anymore is just what they're telling us. People don't believe that this government shutdown is just a government shutdown. People don't believe that this is just about a border wall, and they'd be smart, to start to question some of these things. So the system is adapted to try to encompass the mindsets of these individuals who no longer buy the mainstream narratives, but unfortunately are still susceptible, if they're not inoculated, against this with information, if they're not inoculated against the propaganda with the appropriate information. Now, there are people who think Donald Trump is either part of the New World Order train or he's trying to derail it altogether, that the deep state is fighting him and they're at war. And I believe the term deep state has been co-opted because I believe that this agenda far goes beyond, the right and left paradigm. I believe that the political system is used as a vehicle to push these initiatives and agenda along. I don't think that you can solve a problem with the same mindset that caused it. So if you're having these political issues and these impasses, it's not likely going to take more bureaucracy and more politics that's going to fix it. And I've often said before, if you think a president or a Congress is going to fix some of our problems, you're more short-sighted than you might realize. These people are here to push a narrative. They're here to push an agenda. And even if you don't believe in things like, God and the devil, a lot of these people do. A lot of these are elites and our politicians admit to being Satanists or Luciferians, or at the very least having some very strange beliefs. And when you start to look at the more esoteric aspects of the things that they really believe, then you start to question, well, these are the people that's in power. For example, all the presidents have been related. Trump is related to Hillary. Obama is related to the Bushes. Let's go ahead and play a clip. Some of you may have already, this may just be review for you, but for those of you who don't know, yes, all the United States presidents are related. Let's go ahead and play that clip.
And then it goes to John Adams, Thomas Jefferson.
11-year-old Bridget Davigno says she's made a first-of-its-kind discovery that President Obama and all the presidents before him, with the exception of one, are related and descendants of a former king of England.
No, they are all cousins, and they're grandsons of John Lackland.
Davigno says she spent countless hours on the internet over the summer researching the lineage of our presidents, a project that started with her trying to trace her own family tree.
But I'm the first historian to do all the presidents. I'm very glad I got this done, and I think it will turn out to be.
So initially, Bridget Davignon, she wasn't able to link Martin Van Buren to the rest of the presidents, but I think it was 3 years later, where another researcher was able to link Martin Van Buren to Eleanor of Aquitaine, and Hillary Clinton and as well as Donald Trump are related. So again, you can adhere to what theories you want, but when you start to take these kind of things into and maybe on some level we're all related, right? Adam and Eve, or whatever you believe. So maybe on one level we're all related, but it starts to get very suspicious because they say that there's only 3 requirements to become president. You have to be 35 years of age, live here for 14 years, and be a natural born citizen, I believe, and you can become president. And do you really think, what are the odds out of 324 million Americans that only family members are going to get elected? At least family members that are linked back to this royalty where we were supposed to have gained our independence from, right? We celebrate Independence Day. And many people are of the mind that the same powers that was ruling us back then is ruling us now, and that there's another side to it. That this isn't, do we think that the elites, right, they perpetuate, let's say this martial law scenario happens and they get their way, the New World Order comes. Do you think that they're just going to sit back and sip juice? Things are going to be, we're just going to be in this perpetual state of police state and martial law. We are in the New World Order where we see these false flags and these psychological operations used against us and these political tactics to keep us in a tribalism mentality where we're constantly at each other's throats. And once we hear somebody else espousing one idea, we automatically lump them in wholesale with either left or right label or bigot because that's what's been put out there socially. I think there's so much more going on, especially with this whole wall debate. If you think we're just trying to get funding for a wall and we don't have money for the wall, come on. I've said it before. Trump, didn't he just send some odd billion down to South America circa the caravan? We send millions of dollars to Israel a day. Trump said we've been getting billions of dollars in tariffs.
Can you tell us what sort of progress you meant when you were referring to trade talks with China?
Well, I think we're doing very well. China's paying us tremendous tariffs. We're getting billions and billions of dollars of money pouring into the Treasury of the United States.
So, do we not have the money for this wall? And again, this is only for 20% or 10% of a $200 a 2,000-mile wall. They only want 200 miles of this thing. I mean, are we going to have to do this later for the other 90%? I've asked these questions before because you have to look down the line. I mean, who's being impacted by this? You're starting to see American citizens' wages being held hostage. And I mean, in that sense, an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. And, I've said it before. If somebody was telling me this was coming last year, I'd have been like, wow, you're really, SNAP benefits and tax refunds potentially going to be impacted by this. Wow, who have you been listening to? But now look what's happening. It's just because they've spun it in this way, And depending on how far you go, this government shutdown can transition into something else entirely. What do you think the presidential alerts have been about? The false alarms that have been happening? Hawaii's false missile test. Japan had a false missile alert. 911 went down because supposedly CenturyLink. All this stuff has been happening. It's a little suspicious. It's coinciding at the same time, especially since just after the turn of last year, Russia, China, America, Japan, they all shot missiles up into the sky. SpaceX has been doing some very strange things. All this coinciding within such a short time frame, you've got to wonder if they're preparing for something. We see the national drills that are being run from the East Coast all the way to the West Coast. You see, Jade Helm, Cascadia Rising. I've covered these on my channel before. Just taking a look at this, you have got to ask, what are they preparing for? There are some people who really go out on a limb and say the reason why we've seen New York overpasses and bridges getting upgrades, San Francisco bridges and overpasses getting upgrades is because they're getting ready to lock down the cities, and these things need to be able to support the weights of Humvees and tanks, Now, that may be going far out there, but I wouldn't put it past them. I wouldn't put past the military, because if anybody can keep a secret, it would be the military. We see these big, beautiful walls going up all over America alongside the freeways. Could that be because they don't want you being able to make U-turns if they're shutting down the cities, or you can't be able to run into the cities because you've got these 18-foot walls on the freeways? These are the ideas that are being passed out there. The conspiracy theories, if you will, that are being passed out there because people are no longer buying into the mainstream narratives. So when they don't know something, they speculate. And in some ways it's good because you're questioning the mainstream narratives and you're starting to wake up to it. But if you're out of the frying pan and into the fire in this kind of analogy, then you're not doing anybody any favors, especially if you have a following and you're misinforming people. And look, I'm not perfect. I'm going to have mistakes. I'm flawed. I'm not always going to be right. But the thing is we have to be able to consider different things going on here. We have to expand our optics, because if you think this is just about politics and power, they are puppet masters. There are people who are, lifers in the government who are there for 10, 20 years or more. Presidents are here today, gone tomorrow. People, they're there to serve a purpose, and then once their purpose is gone, somebody else comes in and takes their place. And again, the political system keeps us in this tribalism. That's not to say that there isn't certain things you can do, like voting within your community, your city, your state. That's something that impacts you directly. But when you invest and you start to try to do what's better for your party rather than what's better for America, and things get so bad where you're starting to infringe on rights and stuff like this, we're starting to go into a very dark direction. And I think that's what we need to take into account when we start to think of things like, well, what's going on with the government shutdown? If we're making enemies now, see, the thing is we wrestle not against flesh and blood, right? We wrestle against principalities and powers, spiritual wickedness, and the rulers of darkness of this world. Our battle is against something completely different here. And I think that that's what's important, is that these people, these elites, they work for something else. They believe in something else. These people, these elites, these powers who shouldn't be, the upper echelons, you know what I mean? These are the people that we're talking about, that the 1% or the 5% that control virtually everything, all the finances, people who are pining for the one world government, the one world currency, and the one world religion. And that doesn't mean some airy-fairy type deal. That means religious order where people are all falling in line with the same beast system. They're all worshiping the same thing, and worship, it looks different to everyone. Okay, we've seen the RFID chips, we've seen the barcode, we've seen a lot of this technology being integrated into our biology, and it's amazing the parallels between what they say in Revelations with having a mark in the right hand and in the forehead. And a lot of people believe that, you know, the right hand is action and the forehead is thoughts, but to see the physical manifestation of that, to see something play out, that this, you know, this ancient book, right, the Bible, it's reading our mail. It's telling us of things that's going to come, and they're happening as we speak. Just touching into this briefly, you have to understand that there is a spiritual aspect to this. If you're only looking at this from one side and you're not taking it into account, the non-corporeal, the non-physical aspects of this, you're missing half of the story. Because why are our elites, why are our celebrities, why do these individuals who have so much power and fame, why do they pledge their allegiance to Lucifer? Why do they say they sold their souls to the devil? How do you think that they're able to get ahead while we're over here still trying to figure it out? You know, the best we can do is get into real estate and the stock markets while they found ways to become wealthy off of our work. You know, we're over here going to college and putting ourselves into debt because that's the route that we think is going to be, you know, the best for us, while we're trying to figure it out. They've already got this figured out. You know what I mean? They're in a completely different level. They don't live lives like us. And again, by they, I mean the powers who shouldn't be, the elites, the people who have given their allegiance over to those spiritual wickedness that we discussed. And in my videos coming up, I want to be able to touch on this because I know this is getting too long, and when things start to get too long, it starts to deter a lot of viewers. So I'm going to touch on this in a part 2. If you suffered through this here, just wait until you have to suffer through part 2. But no, you could have been anywhere else. Thanks for stopping by. California Carter signing off.